How do you get a bully to snitch on themselves? My bully made fun of me so much that he triggered a school shooting lockdown. It all started when I was sitting alone in the cafeteria. TJ grabbed my free lunch tray and tossed it into the trash can, grinning as 30 kids watched him literally take food out of a poor kid's mouth for entertainment. Oops. Guess you'll have to wait for food stamps. But whenever I told my parents about it, it was always the same response. Please just stop causing trouble. You see, his parents owned half the businesses in town, including the diner where both my parents worked double shifts. Standing up for myself meant getting evicted, and he knew this all too well. But on that same Tuesday, TJ had something special planned. We were in Miss Louise's history class when she got called to the office. TJ immediately spun around. You, food stamps, where's your friends at? I was just staring at my Chromebook pretending I didn't exist, but my hands were already doing that shaky thing. He started going through my stuff like he owned the place. That's when he found it. The photo tucked inside my notebook of me and my mom at her citizenship ceremony. Her proudest moment. Oh my gosh. He held it up. Is this your mom? Look at her crying. He started doing this exaggerated fake Chinese accent. I'm so happy to be American. I clean toilet real good now. The whole class went dead silent. I give good happy ending. I learned from my son. My face was going red. What's wrong? TJ grinned. Can't take a joke? Maybe that's why your dad drinks so much. I'd drink too if... Shut up. Ooh, he speaks. Hey everyone. The yellow poverty boy found his voice. He pulled out his phone. Number. Not this. It was a video from his dad's diner. My mom was cleaning tables at 2 a.m. and some drunk customer yelled at her. She was just taking it, nodding, apologizing for something that wasn't even her fault. Anything to keep putting food on our table. TJ turned the volume all the way up. Yes, sir. So sorry, sir. I fix right away, sir. I could hear her exhaustion, see her shoulders sagging. The whole class was watching my mother get humiliated in high definition. That was when I noticed the red button under Ms. Louise's desk. Your whole family's pathetic, TJ continued. At least my parents own things instead of cleaning them. Something inside me went quiet. The shaking stopped. You know what, TJ? You're right. You're so much braver than me. He blinked. Obviously. So brave that you'd do anything, right? Not like scared little me. What are you talking about, you freak? I leaned back, weirdly calm now. There's a button under Luce's desk. Red one. So? So press it. The room went still. Why would I? Because you won't. All that tough guy stuff? It's just daddy's money. Take that away and you're nothing. Too scared to press one little button. His face went red. I'm not scared of anything. Prove it. That's stupid. That's what I thought. I turned away. Guess the Littleson family was all talk. Your dad acted tough at the diner too, but everyone knew he was just... TJ slammed his hand on my desk. Shut your mouth about my family. He stormed over to Miss Louise's desk. The whole class held their breath. His finger hovered over it. This is what actual courage looks like, he announced. Click. For 10 seconds, nothing. TJ started laughing. You're so pathetic, you... Wee ooh. Police sirens. They were heading straight towards us. The principal's voice exploded over the intercom. Lockdown! This is not a drill! Repeat! This is not a drill! Red and blue lights flooded through every window. There was a helicopter. TJ was still at the desk, frozen. It was just a button. Hands visible. Nobody move. A SWAT team burst through the door, rifles drawn. TJ dropped to the floor, sobbing. He told me to! He made me. They evacuated the entire school. Mr. Littleson had to push through cameras to get to his son, his face purple with rage. The expulsion was immediate. It turned out pressing a school's emergency threat button was a felony. Who knew? But my revenge was short-lived. Because that night, my parents came home from the diner looking defeated. They'd both been let go. No explanation needed, we all knew why. I figured that was it. TJ was expelled, my parents were unemployed, but at least it was over. I was wrong. A week later, there was a knock at our door. It was Mr. Littleson, and as soon as my mom opened it, he strolled in without even taking off his shoes. Your son cost me a lot this week, he said calmly. Bad publicity, legal fees, my son's future. He turned to me. But I'm willing to make all these problems go away. My mom grabbed my hand. Just hear him out, she whispered. All you have to do, Mr. Littleson continued, is agree to my terms. What he said next made me realize that pranking his son wasn't enough revenge. I had to destroy him. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase and started laying papers across our kitchen table like he was dealing cards. Simple terms, he said while my mom's hand got tighter around mine. Your son goes in front of the school board next week and tells everyone he tricked my boy into pressing that button. He slid the first paper toward us, and I could see it was already typed up with my name at the bottom waiting for a signature. He admits to manipulating an innocent student into triggering a false emergency. The second paper came sliding over, and this one had way more legal words on it. Then you all sign this NDA about any alleged incidents at the diner or anywhere else involving my family. My dad was standing by the sink, and I could see his knuckles going white from gripping the counter. In exchange, you both get your jobs back tomorrow morning with full back pay for this week. Mr. Littleson leaned back in our creaky kitchen chair and looked around our tiny apartment. Or you can keep being stubborn and see how long you last without any income in this town. He stood up and left the papers on our table. You have until Monday to decide. He walked out without closing the door behind him, and we could hear his expensive shoes clicking down the hallway. Nobody moved for the longest time, and I just stared at those papers, while my mom finally let go of my hand to rub her temples. Dad walked over and quietly shut the door, then came back to the table and picked up the papers one by one, reading them carefully. 20 minutes went by with just the sound of the clock ticking and cars passing outside our window. We need those jobs, Dad finally said, but he was looking at me, not Mom. But I'm not going to force you to lie about what that kid did to you. Mom started crying quietly, and Dad put his arm around her shoulders. We'll figure something out. That night I couldn't sleep, so I grabbed my laptop and started searching everything I could about retaliation and labor laws. Most of the legal websites were super confusing with all these big words and references to different acts and statutes, but I kept bookmarking pages that mentioned wrongful termination. I found this one site about whistleblower protections that said employers couldn't fire people for reporting illegal stuff, and I wondered if bullying counted. There was another page about retaliation that explained how it was illegal to punish employees for their family members' actions, and I took screenshots of everything. By 3 a.m., I had like 40 tabs open, and my eyes were burning, but I kept reading about cases where people sued their employers and won. The next morning at breakfast, I showed my parents some of the stuff I found and told them we shouldn't sign anything yet. Let's just explore our options first, I said, while Mom poured coffee with shaky hands. Maybe there's another way. They both looked scared, but Dad nodded and said we could wait a few days before deciding anything. School felt weird without TJ there, but his friends kept shooting me dirty looks in the hallway. After history class, I waited for everyone to leave, then approached Ms. Louisa, who was erasing the whiteboard. Can I ask you something? She turned around, and I could tell she already knew what this was about. I was wondering if you'd be willing to confirm that you left the classroom that day when you got called to the office. She put down the eraser and looked uncomfortable. I'll think about it, she said quietly, and then started packing up her stuff really fast. At lunch, I was sitting in my usual corner spot picking at my replacement free lunch when this kid Tyrone from the school paper walked up to my table. Mind if I sit? He didn't wait for an answer and pulled out his phone. I've been documenting TJ's crap for months, he said, and started scrolling through his camera roll. Got tons of videos from the cafeteria. He turned the phone toward me, and there it was, clear as day, TJ grabbing my tray and tossing it in the trash while everyone laughed. This one's from last week, Tyrone said, and swiped to another video where TJ was making those same racist comments about my mom. Been building a file since my cousin was his target last year. The quality was perfect, and you could hear everything TJ said, including stuff I'd forgotten about. Would you share these with the right people when the time comes? I asked, and Tyrone immediately nodded. Already been waiting for someone to actually do something about him, he said, and gave me his number. Just text me when you need them. After school, I walked 12 blocks to the community center where they had signs about free legal aid on Wednesdays. The waiting room was packed with people, and the lady at the desk said it would be at least a 3-hour wait, but I signed in anyway. I sat there doing homework and watching people go in and out of the little offices until finally around 6 p.m. they called my name. The attorney was this woman named Allison Novak, who had papers everywhere on her desk and looked tired, but she listened to my whole story without interrupting once. When I finished explaining about my parents getting fired right after the button incident, she immediately sat up straighter. Your parents have a really strong retaliation case, she said, and started writing notes on a yellow pad. They can't legally fire someone because their kid reported bullying or triggered a legitimate safety concern. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card with her name and the legal aid office number on it. Have your parents call me tomorrow morning to set up a formal consultation. She started writing on a yellow notepad again. And you need to start documenting everything that's happened with dates and times and any witnesses who were there. I took the card and nodded while she kept talking about how important evidence would be. She said to write down everything I could remember about TJ and his dad, and to get my parents to do the same with their work stuff. When I finally left the office, it was getting dark, and I had to run to catch the last bus home. My parents were already eating dinner when I walked in, and I could tell they'd been worried about where I was. I showed them Allison's card and explained everything she'd said about the retaliation case. Mom's hands started shaking again, but Dad looked more hopeful than he had in days. After dinner, I grabbed a notebook and started writing down every single thing TJ had done to me since freshman year. Mom sat next to me and helped me remember specific dates, like when he dumped chocolate milk on my head during the winter dance. Dad got his own paper and started listing all the schedule changes at work and the times missed her. Littleson had yelled at them for no reason. We stayed up until midnight working on our lists, and by the time we were done, we had 12 pages of stuff. The next morning, Mom called Allison's office while Dad was getting ready for his job search. They put her on speaker, and Allison explained the whole process and what documents they'd need to bring. She said Friday afternoon would work for a meeting, and Dad immediately said yes, even though he had an interview scheduled then. This is more important, he told Mom after hanging up. At the school the next day, everything felt different without TJ there, but his friends were still around giving me looks. During lunch, I walked over to where Sarah Cruz was sitting with her friends. She'd been in our history class when TJ pressed the button, and I knew she'd seen him bullying me before. I asked if I could talk to her for a second, and she followed me to a quieter spot by the lockers. Would you be willing to write down what you saw TJ do to me? I asked. She looked nervous and glanced around like someone might be watching. I don't want problems with his family, she said. I told her it would just be for documentation and she wouldn't have to testify or anything. She thought about it for a minute, then said, okay. I found 2 other kids who'd been in classes where TJ had messed with me. Galen agreed right away because TJ had bullied his little brother last year. Nicole took more convincing, but finally said she'd write something short about what she'd seen. Between classes, the principal's secretary found me and said I needed to come to the office immediately. The principal was sitting behind his big desk with his hands folded when I walked in. I heard you've been asking students to write statements, he said. I didn't say anything. The Littlesons have been very generous to this school and this community, he continued. Their offer to resolve this situation is more than fair. He leaned forward and looked at me over his glasses. I strongly suggest you consider accepting it for the sake of everyone involved. I told him I'd think about it, and he frowned but let me leave. After school, I was walking to the bus stop when Ms. Louisa called my name from behind. She caught up to me and looked around to make sure no one was listening. I wanted you to know I'll provide a written statement about leaving the classroom that day, she said quietly. I should have been more responsible and I'm sorry you had to deal with TJ alone. She said she'd already written it up and would give it to whoever needed it. I thanked her, and she walked away quickly like she didn't want anyone to see us talking. Friday came fast, and my parents both dressed up nice for the meeting with Allison. Dad had canceled his warehouse interview, but said getting justice was worth it. We took 2 buses to get to the legal aid office and signed in at the front desk. Allison's office was even messier than before with files everywhere, but she cleared a space for us to sit. She spent 2 hours explaining how my parents could file complaints with the State Labor Board and the EEC for discrimination. The process could take several months, she said while showing us forms. But you have really strong grounds, especially with the timing of the firing. She pulled out another folder and started talking about Mr. Littleson's demands. Him asking for an NDA could actually be witness tampering since there's a criminal investigation about the emergency button, she explained. That gives you unexpected leverage in negotiations. My parents looked confused, so she explained it more simply. Saturday morning, Dad's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Mr. Littleson saying he heard we were making things complicated, and that would be unfortunate for everyone. The message said we should reconsider his offer before things got difficult for our family in this small town. Dad showed it to Mom and me, and we all knew it was a threat, even though he was careful with his words. Dad forwarded the screenshot to Allison right away without responding to Mr. Littleson. Within an hour, Allison texted back saying this was perfect evidence of harassment and intimidation. She said not to respond to any messages from him and to document everything. I'll send him a cease and desist letter on Monday about the harassment, she wrote. Monday morning came way too fast, and when I got to the school, I could feel everyone staring at me. Walking to my locker, I noticed kids whispering and pointing like I was some kind of celebrity for all the wrong reasons. When I turned the corner to my hallway, I saw it right away. Someone had written snitch across my locker in thick black marker that covered half the metal door. I pulled out my phone and took 3 different pictures from different angles, making sure the timestamp showed clearly. A group of TJ's friends stood at the end of the hall watching me, and one of them made a throat-cutting motion with his finger. I ignored them and tried to open my locker, but the marker was still wet and got all over my hands. The janitor saw me struggling and came over with some cleaning spray, but shook his head when he saw what it said. During second period, Tyrone found me in the library and showed me his laptop screen. He'd written an article for the school paper called When Protection Becomes Persecution, and even though he didn't use any names, everyone would know exactly what he was talking about. The article talked about how bullying victims often face punishment for reporting, while the actual bullies get protected by money and connections. He'd included statistics about unreported harassment and quotes from anonymous students about being afraid to speak up. The newspaper advisor had already approved it for Friday's edition, and Tyrone said the principal couldn't legally stop it since no names were mentioned. That afternoon when I got home, Mom was on the phone speaking rapid Mandarin to someone, and I could tell she was excited. She hung up and told me 3 other workers from the diner had called her after hearing about our situation. They all had stories about the Littlesons treating them badly and not paying overtime and making them work through breaks. One woman said Mr. Littleson had fired her cousin for taking a sick day when her kid was in the hospital. Another said they made her work a double shift while she had the flu because they threatened to cut her hours if she went home. Mom wrote down all their names and phone numbers and said they wanted to join whatever complaint we were filing. Tuesday morning, Allison called to say she'd filed the formal complaints with both the State Labor Board and the EECC. She'd included everything we'd documented, plus the evidence of retaliatory firing and the pattern of discrimination against immigrant workers. The complaints were 30 pages long with all our evidence attached, including the timeline I'd made and statements from the other workers. She said the agencies would have to respond within 30 days, but usually they moved faster on cases with clear retaliation. Wednesday afternoon, the diner got served with official notice from the Labor Board. They were under investigation and had to provide all employee records going back 2 years, including time cards and pay stubs and scheduling documents. The investigator also wanted to interview current and former employees about working conditions. Mom heard from her friend who still worked there that Mr. Littleson had been yelling on the phone all afternoon, and his lawyer had been at the diner for 3 hours. Thursday at the school felt weird without TJ there, but his friends made sure I didn't forget about him. During history class, someone threw a paper ball at the back of my head hard enough to sting. When I turned around, 3 kids were looking at their desks, trying not to laugh. The paper had "rat" written all over it in red pen. Miss Louisa saw it happen, but just told everyone to settle down without actually doing anything about it. After class, she pulled me aside and apologized, but said the administration had told teachers to avoid taking sides in the situation. Friday morning, the detective who'd been investigating the emergency button incident called our house. He asked me to explain again exactly what happened that day, and I told him everything, including how TJ had been harassing me for years. I explained about the photo of my mom and the video from the diner, and how he'd made racist comments about our family. The detective asked if I had any proof of the long-term harassment, and I told him about Tyrone's videos and the other students who'd witnessed it. He said he'd need to interview them too, and asked for their contact information. That weekend, my parents started seriously looking for new jobs, but it was harder than we thought. The Littlesons owned the 2 biggest restaurants in town, plus a catering company, and had connections with most other businesses. Mom filled out an application for the hospital cafeteria, and Dad applied to 3 warehouses in the next town over. The hospital seemed interested in Mom because of her experience, but said they wouldn't have an opening for 6 weeks. Dad got a call back from one warehouse, but they wanted him to work night shifts, which would mean we'd never see him. Monday of the next week, Allison called with news. Mr. Littleson's lawyer had sent her a letter offering to settle everything for 1 month of severance pay if we dropped all the complaints and signed an agreement to not discuss the situation publicly. Allison actually laughed when she read it to us over the phone. She said it was insulting considering they owed my parents way more than that just in unpaid overtime from the past 2 years. She was going to counter with a demand for 6 months' pay, plus damages, plus neutral employment references. Tuesday night was the school board meeting, and Dad said we should go to see what they were saying about the emergency button incident. The auditorium was packed with parents, and some were holding signs about school safety. The board president announced they were reviewing all emergency procedures and looking at their anti-bullying policies to see what needed to be changed. Several parents stood up during public comment to say the school had failed to protect students from bullying for years. One mom said her daughter had reported harassment 5 times with no action taken. Another parent said the emergency button situation showed how desperate kids were getting when the normal channels didn't work. Wednesday morning, Mom called me into the kitchen before school and showed me an email on her phone from the hospital saying they wanted to interview her for the cafeteria position next Monday. Her hands were shaking a little as she scrolled through it, and I could tell she was trying not to get her hopes up too much. Dad was at the table with his own phone checking his email every 5 minutes because the warehouse supervisor said he'd get back to him by the end of the week. That same afternoon at the school, I was walking to my locker when I saw a bunch of kids crowded around someone's phone watching something. When I got closer, I realized it was footage from the day TJ pressed the button. Someone had been recording the whole thing on their phone, and now it was all over social media. The video showed me calmly telling him to press it, and him actually doing it while bragging about his courage. By Thursday, the video had thousands of views, and comments were split between people calling me a genius and others saying I manipulated him. Allison called that evening with big news about our case. The labor board had completed their initial investigation at the diner and found multiple violations, including unpaid overtime for at least 15 employees and improper break policies that violated state law. She explained this gave us major leverage because the fines alone would be tens of thousands of dollars, and Mr. Littleson would want to avoid that kind of publicity. She was sending them a new settlement demand based on these findings. Friday after school, I overheard 2 women talking in the grocery store parking lot about how they used to work at the diner and never got paid for staying late to close. One of them mentioned she'd heard about our complaint through a cousin who still worked there and was thinking about joining it. By Monday, 3 more diner employees had officially contacted Allison to join our complaint, including the night shift cook who'd been there 8 years, and the weekend manager who had detailed records of all the unpaid hours. Mom went to her hospital interview that morning wearing her best outfit and came back 2 hours later with a huge smile on her face. They'd offered her the position on the spot with better hours than the diner, full health insurance, and even a small signing bonus. Dad got a call that afternoon from both warehouses he'd applied to, and they both wanted him to start as soon as possible. One was union with good benefits, but farther away, while the other was closer, but paid less. He decided on the union job because the protection and overtime pay would be worth the extra drive. Tuesday morning, the principal's secretary found me before first period and said I needed to come to the office immediately. When I walked in, the principal was there with the school counselor, Melinda Ward, who smiled at me in that fake, concerned way adults do when they think you're troubled. The principal started talking about how the whole emergency button incident had been traumatic for everyone, and maybe I should talk to someone about my feelings. Melinda nodded along and suggested weekly sessions to process what happened and help me move forward in a healthy way. I could tell what they really wanted was for me to stop causing problems and just let everything blow over. Instead of agreeing, I looked directly at Melinda and asked if she could pull up all my previous reports about TJ's bullying since she was the counselor. Her smile got tight, and she said she wasn't sure what I meant. I reminded her about the 3 times I'd come to her office about TJ taking my lunch, the time he shoved me into a locker, and when he spread rumors about my family being illegal immigrants. She shifted in her chair and said she'd have to check her files. The principal jumped in saying we should focus on moving forward, not dwelling on the past, but I kept pushing. I asked Melinda to officially document every report I'd made that hadn't been acted on, and she finally agreed to review my file, though she didn't look happy about it. Wednesday's local news at 6 opened with a story about the labor investigation at several local businesses, including the diner. The reporter stood outside the diner talking about how the state was cracking down on wage theft, and several employees had come forward with complaints. They didn't mention our family by name, but showed a shot of the diner with a closed sign in the window during what should have been lunch rush. Mr. Littleson was probably losing money every hour they stayed closed for the investigation. Thursday, both my parents started their new jobs, and the difference was immediate. Mom came home at 5:30 instead of midnight, and Dad was actually awake enough to eat dinner with us. They both seemed lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. With steady paychecks coming from jobs where the Littlesons had no power over them, they felt brave enough to really pursue the complaints. Allison called that night to say the labor board wanted to schedule official mediation between us and Mr. Littleson to try to reach a settlement. She explained this was good because it meant they were taking it seriously and wanted to resolve it quickly. Friday, I heard through Tyrone that TJ was back in the school, but at Riverside High across town as part of his plea deal with the court. Someone's cousin went there and said TJ kept to himself now, and his parents dropped him off and picked him up every day like he was in elementary school. The cousin also mentioned TJ was seeing a counselor twice a week and wasn't allowed to have social media anymore. The mediation got scheduled for next month with a state mediator who specialized in employment disputes. Allison came to our apartment Saturday morning to prepare us and explained we should ask for back pay for all the unpaid overtime, damages for the retaliatory firing, and most importantly, a non-retaliation agreement that would prevent the Littlesons from trying to hurt us again through their business connections. Sunday night around 8, someone knocked on our door, and when Mom opened it, Mr. Littleson pushed right past her into our living room. His face was red, and he kept clenching his fists while Dad stood up from the couch real slow. Mr. Littleson pointed at me and said we needed to drop everything now or things would get worse for everyone. Dad moved between us and told him to leave right now or he'd call the cops. Mr. Littleson stared at him for like 10 seconds, then turned around and walked out, slamming the door so hard the whole wall shook. Mom locked the deadbolt and put the chain on while Dad called Allison to tell her what happened. She said to document everything and if he came back to actually call the police this time. The next week at the school, they installed cameras in all the hallways and the cafeteria, plus these new signs about reporting bullying. The principal called an assembly where he talked about the new rules and how there would be zero tolerance for harassment going forward. Melinda got put in charge of training teachers on how to spot bullying, and she had to run these workshops every Friday afternoon. I saw her in the hall carrying boxes of pamphlets about recognizing warning signs, and she gave me this weird smile like she was trying to be friendly now. The mediation finally happened 3 weeks later at this government building downtown. We sat on one side of a long table with Allison while Mr. Littleson and his lawyer sat across from us. The mediator was this older woman who kept taking notes while everyone talked. Mr. Littleson's lawyer started by offering 3 months of back pay if we signed papers saying we wouldn't sue or talk about it publicly. Allison actually laughed and said that was insulting considering the years of unpaid overtime and the illegal firing. She pulled out this thick folder of documents showing all the labor violations at the diner. She wanted 6 months' pay, plus damages, plus a written apology from Mr. Littleson admitting what he did. His lawyer whispered to him for a while, then came back with 4 months' pay, but still no apology. We went back and forth for 4 hours with breaks every hour where we'd go to separate rooms. Mom kept squeezing my hand under the table while Dad took notes on everything they said. Finally, around 2 in the afternoon, we settled on 4 months of back pay for both my parents, plus continued health insurance for 6 months, plus neutral job references. Mr. Littleson wouldn't apologize, but he had to sign papers agreeing to no contact with our family ever again. 2 weeks after that, the labor board announced their findings, and the diner got hit with a $30,000 fine. They had to post these big signs about workers' rights in English and Spanish and pay back overtime to 12 employees going back 2 years. The newspaper ran a story about it with a picture of the diner and quotes from the labor board about wage theft being a serious crime. Some of the other workers who joined our complaint got their own settlements, and one woman used her money to buy a food truck. She parked it right across from the diner every lunch and breakfast, selling better food for less money. I saw her there one morning and she waved at me with this huge smile on her face. The state started sending auditors to check the diner's books every 3 months, and they had to submit payroll reports every week now. Mr. Littleson had to hire an accountant just to deal with all the new paperwork and oversight. At the school, things got way better once everyone saw I wasn't backing down. Kids started talking to me in the halls and sitting near me at lunch. Tyrone and I got really close working on articles for the school paper about student rights and standing up to power. He showed me how to research public records, and we found out the Littlesons owed tons of back taxes on their properties. We didn't publish that, but it was good to know. Mom loved her new job at the hospital where she worked normal hours and got overtime pay when she stayed late. She came home with energy instead of looking dead tired all the time. Dad's warehouse job had union protection, so he couldn't get fired without cause, and they had to follow all the safety rules. He joined the union board after a few months and started helping other workers file grievances. Our apartment felt different now without that constant worry about money or losing jobs. We could actually save a little each month, and Mom started talking about maybe buying a small house someday. One Saturday, about 6 months later, I was at the grocery store getting milk when I turned the corner and almost ran into TJ. He was with his mom and looked way different, skinnier and quiet. We just stood there for a second, then he gave me this small nod. Not mean or friendly, just like acknowledging I existed. His mom pulled him away quick, but that nod felt like something had shifted between us, even if we'd never be anything close to friends. The next week, Melinda Ward sent me an email asking if I could stop by her office after school. I walked in and she had this stack of papers on her desk plus a box of tissues, which seemed weird. She closed the door and sat down across from me instead of behind her desk. She said she'd been reviewing all the incident reports from the past 3 years and found 17 reports about TJ that never got proper follow-up. Her hands kept moving papers around while she talked about new protocols they were implementing. Every bullying report would now require written response within 48 hours, and parents would get copies of everything. She pulled out this thick manual they'd created with specific consequences for each type of harassment. The school board approved hiring 2 more counselors just for conflict resolution. She showed me the new anonymous reporting app students could use on their phones. 3 months later, the district's anti-bullying program got recognized by the state education department. They sent this fancy certificate and a $1,000 grant for more training. The local news did a segment about it and interviewed the principal who talked about creating safe learning environments. They wanted me to speak at the awards ceremony downtown, but I told them no thanks. I had other stuff to focus on, like college applications. The acceptance letters started showing up in March. First was State University with partial aid, then 2 rejections from expensive private schools. But then the big envelope came from my top choice with a full-ride scholarship plus work study. The financial aid letter mentioned my essay about standing up to systemic oppression and how it aligned with their values. Mom cried when she read it, and Dad took a picture of the letter to send to his brother. Around the same time, the newspaper ran another story about the Littlesons selling their second restaurant location to pay legal settlements. The labor board had expanded their investigation to all their businesses and found violations at 3 properties. They had to sell the mini golf place and one of the gas stations just to cover fines and back wages. Their remaining businesses got audited monthly now and had to submit weekly compliance reports. The diner stayed open, but with half the tables it used to have. Graduation day came in June, and the gym was packed with families. When they called my name, I walked across that stage and could hear Mom yelling something in her language from the bleachers. Dad stood up and clapped so loud people turned to look. After the ceremony, they both hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. Mom kept touching the honor cord I got for grades, and Dad said he knew I'd make it through everything. We took pictures by the school sign, and Mom posted them everywhere online. That same week, Tyrone got his acceptance letter from the journalism program at Northwestern with a $15,000 scholarship from some foundation for investigative reporting. He texted me this long message about how watching me stand up to the Littlesons showed him what real journalism could do. He was planning to focus on labor rights and corruption in small towns. His first assignment for the school paper next year would be following up on our town's story. 2 days before I left for college, Mom cooked all my favorite foods. She made spring rolls and that soup I loved, plus Dad grilled burgers outside. We sat at our little kitchen table that wobbled, and Dad poured water into the good glasses we never used. He raised his glass and said something about new beginnings in broken English. Mom added something about courage in her language. We clinked glasses and ate until we couldn't move. They gave me this card they'd both signed with money they'd saved from their new jobs. Inside, Mom wrote about being proud in her careful handwriting. Dad just wrote, "Show them who you are," in big letters. The morning I left, they loaded my stuff into Dad's truck. The dorm was 4 hours away, but they wanted to drive me. We passed the diner on the way out of town, and it looked smaller somehow with fewer cars in the lot. The new employee rights poster was visible through the window in English and Spanish, just like the law required. Mom pointed at it and smiled. At college orientation, they had us write about a time we created positive change. I wrote 3 sentences about the whole thing, then turned it in. The girl next to me had written 2 pages about organizing a beach cleanup, but I was done writing about it and ready to focus on what came next. The diner had to pay fair wages now with overtime and breaks. The school had real protection for students getting bullied. The Littlesons learned that money couldn't fix everything when you broke the law. None of it happened the way I planned, but it happened, and that was enough. Thanks for letting me wonder along with you today. Hopefully my questions added a little something extra to the experience. Until we meet again, like the video, it helps more than you think.